Okay, so at the end of your exam paper, you're going to get an 8-mark question, and similar to the 6-mark question, you get marks for whether or not you say is correct, but also for how you explain yourself, whether you use correct spelling, punctuation, grammar, and use the correct language, so technical language. So this question's all about software development life cycles, and you've got to discuss two possible software development life cycles and compare them. So discuss means that you explain them, and then you explain the possible advantages and disadvantages of each one. So we're looking for detailed comparisons and a conclusion, hopefully. So first of all, we need to understand the different stages of a software development life cycle. So to begin with, you've got your specification stage, where you sit in a room with the customer. You're the programmer, you sit with the customer, they say, I want you to make a piece of software that does this. You ask them lots of questions and you agree on a contract that says what your program is going to have to do. So that's the specification. On your controlled assessments, that's like the candidate book. It tells you what you have to do. Then you've got the design phase, where you go away and write down how you're going to solve this problem. You might make some flowcharts to explain what your code's going to do. You might write some pseudocode. You might plan out whether you're going to use a database, what variables you're going to use, what your system requirements are. You go through and plan each section, work out how long it's going to take, how many people you're going to need, what software tools you're going to use, all of that sort of stuff. So you go through the specification and work out what you need to do to meet it. Then you've got your implementation. This is the fun bit where you write the code, you make it work, you write all the code to do all of the different features that are included in your specification. Once you've written the code, you need to test it to prove that it does what you want it to do, but more importantly, what the customer wants it to do. So you test it usually based on a testing plan. You write lots and lots of tests, like you did for your testing table for your controlled assessments. So you can know which areas of the specification it meets, how robust it is, how efficient it is, how well it works. And then once you've tested it, you might want to go back and look at how it can be improved. So how you could extend it in the future, what extra features you could add on, what optional things you could try and sell to the user, so how you could extend it in the future. So these are all the stages, and all of the software development life cycles have aspects of these 5 stages. So let's talk through each of the main ones. So first of all, if we talk through the waterfall life cycle, so you can picture it like an actual waterfall, where you've got water flowing down from the top of a mountain to the bottom into a reservoir, and each of these boxes is one of the stages here. So we start with the specification, and you do all of that right at the beginning before you go on to do all of the design. And then once you finish that, and only once you finish that, you go on to do the implementation. And once you finish that, and only when you finish that, you move on to the testing and then the evolution. So it's nice and simple. It's easy to draw, which means it's easy for managers to understand, particularly managers who don't know how to code themselves. You know when you're going to start the project, you can allocate maybe a month to each stage, and you've got a deadline. Easy to manage, easy to follow. You know where you are, and you know how much further you've got left to do. Okay. Disadvantages are that it's inflexible. So at the beginning, at the specification stage, if the user says they want something to happen, they might change their mind whilst you're coding it, and there's no possibility to go back in the waterfall life cycle. You never see water flowing up a waterfall. So it's very inflexible, which means it's nice and simple, but it's very frustrating for a customer if they change their mind later on. Then you might have the spiral life cycle, where you start with some specifications, so you chat to the customer and then you design that part of the specification, and then you go on and implement it, and then you test it, and then you evaluate it. And then you go around and you keep doing the same sort of thing. You then chat to the user again, show them what you've done, see if it meets their specification, and then you go and design a little bit more, and you write a little bit more code, and you test it a little bit more, and then you improve it. And you chat to the user again, see if they have any more specifications, and you keep on designing and implementing and testing and improving until finally you reach the middle of your spiral where the user's happy with what you've done. So this is much more flexible. You're chatting to the user, they're involved in the process, so you end up probably with a better product in terms of what the user wants, but there's no clear end in sight. You don't know how many spirals there are going to be. The user might be really irritating and change their mind all of the time, so you might have a project that stretches on into eternity. It's not as simple to manage, and it might take much longer, but it is much more flexible. Then one that most companies tend to use, most small software companies, certainly web design companies, is called Agile. And that's where you split the project up into all sorts of small chunks. So you might have one team working on one aspect of the program, and they might look at the specification for just that one section of it, and then they might design it, and then they might test it, and then they might improve it afterwards. And you might have another team doing something else at the same time, or the same team, once they finish that, might go on to another section, and you work on another part of the program. So each time you're working on just a tiny part of the program, rather than the waterfall method where you do the whole thing in one go. In Agile, you take one aspect and you get that sorted, then you move on to the next aspect and get that sorted, and the next aspect and get that sorted. So it's very flexible because you have individual build stages with milestones where you want a certain part of the project to work at this point before going on to the next part, or you have multiple teams working on different things. So it's harder for a manager to be able to oversee it. It's not as simple as this waterfall method, but programmers tend to really like it because you split it up into small sections. So here's a summary. Oops, I'll try and put that up here so that you can see it. Okay, so here's a summary table of what we've gone through. I've talked about 3 software development life cycles. You only need to talk about 2. So for a waterfall, that's this one. The advantages are it's really simple. Each phase is clearly separated, so it's nice and easy for managers to know who needs to do what next. Programmers know where they are as we go through a project. Disadvantages are it's inflexible. If you make a mistake, you can't go back and fix it later. So a spiral model, you have loads more client consultation. That's a big advantage. So you're always chatting to the client at each time the spiral goes round. You're able to go back and fix problems if you notice any. Disadvantages are it's not as simple as the waterfall model, so it's harder for a manager to know when you're going to start, when you're going to finish, how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. And it's more complex. It might be more time consuming. Then you've got Agile, which is great for small projects where 1 or 2 people can work on it, where you split the project up into lots of little builds, and then you test regularly. So it can work really quickly. You don't have to waste loads of time doing loads of boring design work right at the beginning, because you just design as you go through. It's very flexible. You might not know how the whole project pans out until you start coding it. So with Agile, you only have to worry about the bit that you're currently working on. So it's fast, it's flexible, programmers like it. But it can be hard for big projects because you haven't got the structure of like the waterfall or the increased contact with the customer in a nice structure. Because you're missing the big picture. If you're only working on the current build, the current feature that you're working on, you might spend ages getting that right and forget about working on an important feature. It's harder to manage because you're only working on small bits. You don't know how far through a big project you are, and you don't know when the whole thing's going to finish. You don't know when the final deadline's going to be. So as long as you know what the 5 steps are, you know what they're called, you know what's involved. So specification, you speak to the customer, work out what you need to do. Design, you work out how to meet the specification. Implementation, you write the code to meet the specification. Testing, you test your code to make sure it meets the specification. And evolution, where you go and improve it. So you must understand that, and you've got to explain the advantages and disadvantages of 2 models. You could talk about some of the other models. So in your revision guide, you've got the incremental model and the V-shaped model. But I think, as a general rule, you must know about the waterfall model, and the spiral model is quite a nice one to compare it to. Okay.